Hello there, my name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And today I'm making a little mock-up scene of a samurai duel, and this is a follow-up to a video where I made that tiny samurai sprite we can see there. That sprite's only about 10 pixels tall or so, and I just wanted to see what it would look like if I carried that small scale idea into a full background design, and just explore how the style and the readability would come out. The canvas size I'm using here is 112 pixels wide by 80 pixels tall. The way I arrived at that sizing was actually from two criteria. I decided to do something that was in a multiple of 8, which is a common tile size for retro games. And you can see that I'm using this 8x8 grid to kind of assist in my composition. I'm not exactly building this as if it's broken up into perfect tiling, but it just gave me something to latch onto when needed. The other decision for the canvas size was that it approximated the aspect ratio used in Kurosawa's films, and I thought it'd be neat to make some pixel art with a resemblance to that. Using something 1 or 2 tile sizes in either direction of what I chose would have been on or near that ratio as well, but the sizing that I selected felt about right to me just based on the character sprite size. And of course, as you can see from the screenshots that I'm referencing for this piece, Ghost of Tsushima was the main inspiration here. And I actually went around in the game to do a bit of location scouting, I guess, just to give myself some reference architecture to work from and to translate into this pixel piece. For those who have played the game, this is the exterior of the Adachi estate in Golden Forest. And I even pulled in the temple for the background, which isn't quite accurate to the layout in the game, but I love seeing it poking through the forest from a distance when you're in other parts of the map, and I figured it'd help establish the location anyway. As for the styling, I've decided to make this piece in grayscale, again just going for that classic cinema kind of feel. And the nice thing about that is we just have to focus on the value of the tones here rather than the color hue and saturation. Sometimes when doing grayscale, I'll lay out a preset palette of gray tones to use, like using brightness values that are spaced out by even units of 10 or something like that. But for this one, I went with more of a freeform kind of approach and just dialed in different values when I felt like I needed something brighter or darker than I already had at play. So along with that, there's a lot of freedom with how to style and detail the piece, mostly from whatever number of tones you decide to use and the way that they're applied together to create detail. As an example of that, you can see my detailing of the boards that make up the walls here that I was trying to experiment with how to approach the style. I wanted to have line work that indicated where each board was, but I also wanted them to look a little bit weathered and also have kind of wood grain texture to them. And you know, that's kind of a tall order for a piece that has such a low resolution, but that's where a lot of the fun and the problem solving comes into play. What I ended up deciding to do was to keep the solid and regular line work of the fence boards in place there, but then just introduce darker tones over top of that. So the first thing here, I'm adding a couple pixels worth of shadow over top, kind of being cast from that upper covering. So each shade of the fence then goes down by 1 step. Then after that, I'm carrying some of that dark tone into the line work between the fence boards, and just applying it in kind of a broken up and random way. And what I found was that this actually ends up doing double duty in terms of making the fence look a bit weathered, but it also maintains the clarity of each board while actually giving them a bit more dimension too. I found that the additions of dark tone into that line work seem to help the clean part of the board pop out a bit more. Maybe that's just the way I'm seeing it though. I don't know, this could be the kind of thing where it's like a magic eye or something where, you know, it might read a bit differently to someone else. But I thought it worked well for what I was trying to achieve here. Another thing I was keeping in mind was the use of contrast. So in general, things further in the background are given a softer appearance by having their tones get weaker the further away that they are. And then the stuff closest to us will be darker and higher contrast. This also was giving the layering kind of a look like it was disappearing into fog, and that's something I ended up playing with later for the final appearance of this piece. The final addition to the scene before the character work was adding in some grass here. And mainly I was trying to use it as a vignette on the ground to try to draw a bit more focus to the duel that's going to be going on front and center there. So with that, I've just tried to curve each end of it to kind of close it in a bit. Alright, for the character animation, I was fortunate in that I had about a dozen poses or so that I worked out from that previous video. So what I did was just collect them into a group, and then duplicate and mirror that full set to give me 2 swordsmen to work with. I'm trying to think, but I don't believe I've ever choreographed a fight sequence like this before. So there's not really like a set workflow or anything that I recommend or that I use for this kind of thing. But what I'm trying to do here is just to make several matchups of two complementary poses from those individual sprites, and just trying to create little beats within the fight sequence. And then what I can do is go in after and make the in-between frames that will carry them between those keyframes. With just the first small set here, it's not too spectacular and obviously a little bit choppy, but you can see the beginnings of a partial sequence here at least. Probably the approach that worked best for me in all this was just to consider what the next moment in the fight sequence would be. Then I'd go ahead and make that frame and try to figure out how to get there from what my current position was, which sometimes only takes a couple frames to make that movement. And sometimes you need a bit more if there needs to be like a longer pause between movements or anything like that. So in this particular moment, I'm working out a bit of a clash where they lock swords and have that kind of back and forth struggle. By the way, a lot of the movements here are just what I thought looked cool at the time. I'm not sure either of these ronin have proper form, probably not. You know, I've spent most of my years studying the square, I didn't study the blade, so the accuracy here is a bit stylized. But at the very least, an attempt was made. The final bit of polish on the animation was adding in a few swoosh frames in between some of those movements, which ended up doing a lot to help the feel of transitioning between poses, since those swooshes can kind of convey information about where the sword has traveled from and to in a single frame. What's nice about this low resolution is that a lot of these movements tend to be pretty forgiving due to the limited detail. So the swoosh lines actually worked as a nice bit of glue in a sense to kind of join everything together. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the final thing. Here we go. Alright, so yeah, a lot of the fight here has some blocks and dodges in it, but I wanted it to be a looping animation rather than coming to a conclusion. And also, a late addition here was the bordering detail of the foliage. I felt like I wanted an even stronger vignette on this piece to draw the attention inward. And I also like that it kind of feels like the fight's being viewed from within the forest. Also, real quick, I just wanted to show a behind the scenes peek at how the fog scrolling looks. So these fog patterns make use of the 8x8 tiling, and they repeat at intervals of 8, 16, and 24 pixels depending on the sizing, and then scroll at a rate of either 1 or 2 pixels per frame. The fight sequence itself is only 24 frames long, but then I've doubled that up to 48 frames total to provide the correct time frame for that fog to scroll across. And we'll close out here with some CRT time. So thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.